And welcome to the CX for CA podcast, the podcast that focuses on customer experience for competitive advantage. And we're delighted today to be here with Lee Miles, the Chief Revenue Officer for Sitecore. So welcome, Lee.
Good morning. Hi.
So let me start off. So you work for Sitecore. Help me understand a little bit. Who are Sitecore and how do they help produce competitive advantage for their customers?
Yeah, so Sitecore is a digital experience platform. So effectively, if you think about brands like Porsche or Emirates, they have their websites and everything that you do and how you interact with them across their digital experience, whether that be mobile or through the web, would be built through Sitecore's platform. So, we have lots of different industries and lots of different types of customers, but, they would be two brands I think would be recognizable for your listeners.
And you're the CRO. What does a CRO do?
Well, not quite CRO. So CROs generally would look after sales, and I do have sales as part of my remit, but actually I'm the Chief Customer Officer. And we were quite deliberate about that because actually if you think about what we're selling as a platform, and we're selling a suite of solutions that will enable them, the customers, to deliver great experiences for their customers, we wanted to be very customer focused. So actually I'm responsible for all of our customer facing organization inside of Sitecore globally. That enables us to be able to kind of join the dots a little better. So sales is an important part of that, but that also leads on to our customer success group, leads on to our services delivery group, leads through our partner ecosystem and through support.
Okay, fantastic. So I want to get back to that and talk a little bit about Sitecore and a little bit about the journey it's been on since you joined a few years ago. But first, let's take a little bit of a step back in your career, because you didn't actually start with as a boy with a fascination for IT, and that wasn't a career that actually was your first choice. Now, tell us about your first career.
First career, actually, I worked for an insurance company in Buckinghamshire in the UK. Started out as a trainee accountant, which, I quickly fell out of love with. I mean, my wife would kill me. She's a trained accountant and a very good one, but it wasn't really for me. And actually ended up moving more into the IT side of the accounting division, which is really where, kind of my career started from an IT perspective. And that was, probably 23-ish years ago, 25 years ago.
Shouldn't reveal something.
I know, yeah.
But see, Lee, I think you're being modest, because I think there's something that happened before you took down the accountancy route that you don't want to talk about, but I'm going to push you on. So what were you doing before you moved into accountancy?
I did play a little bit of football, but, to say it was a career would be probably a bit of a stretch. But I did, when I was young, and I'm talking like 16 years of age, I did play for the junior team in Luton Town Football Club, which I don't know how many of your listeners will know. It's a small town not so small town in Bedford, but was part of the first division back then. So what we would know as the Premier League now, so the top division in UK. They did play in that division, and I played for their under-16s and then under-18s team. But that was a limited time, but it was fun at the time.
What position did you play?
I played in defence.
Defence. And did you, on a serious note, did you ever think you'd make it? Did you think to yourself, this is going to be my full-time thing?
Yeah, I think, a lot of kids grow up with that ambition, don't they? When you ask them what they want to be when they're 8 years of age, I always said professional footballer. And, even probably up until the age of 14, 15, when, I started to play a little better standards and the likes. But actually it became quickly apparent that I wasn't the best player in the club, even at 15, 16, and you start to then doubt yourself a little bit. And a lot of, for every Premier League player that makes it, there are 1,000 that don't, right? So I think there's a lot to do with the mentality and the confidence in a lot of players, but also in the ability. But it was, I had 3 seasons playing at that kind of level, played a few other well-known clubs, my own being Arsenal, and managed to play against them once at Highbury, which was a great experience. So I hold on to that.
So we're actually recording in the beginning of May 2023, and you guys are potentially on the cusp of the first Premier League victory for a wee while. So in sort of bearing in mind, people might listen to this, a few weeks, a few months, a few years in the future. Do you think you guys are going to get over the line as Arsenal?
You've got to still believe, right? But I mean, we're turning up at Newcastle on Saturday, which I think is a bit dear to your heart, right?
Very dear to my heart. You'll lose that.
You could ruin it for us, but we still hold out the hope, right? But it's been. Actually, even that, I mean, Arsenal have not been part of the Premier League Championship for some years, so it's been a really fun season to be involved in.
Fantastic.
Yeah, we still believe.
So tell us a little bit more about that path to your personal path to sort of, Sitecore. What sort of, starting off, taking that sort of inflection point in your career and saying, okay, with football's not going to be the sort of the main thing I do with my time, accountancy, and maybe that wasn't your love. And how did you sort of, go through that sort of path to get to a place where you're sort of on the brink of joining Sitecore?
Yeah, I think the interesting part for me was when I decided really accountancy wasn't really going to be the vocation that I followed and got into the IT side. I actually started on the implementation services side. So I was one of the trainers and one of the consultants that used to turn up to companies in the UK and show them how to use financial and accounting software and sometimes HR software. And that company that I worked for at the time actually was part of Computer Associates, for those that remember Computer Associates. But and again, we went through sort of various different acquisitions. So I was lucky enough to be part of a career that sort of jumped companies quite quickly. But also I was in a position then to be able to swap roles quite frequently. So I didn't really do the same role for more than 2 years at a time. But it was sort of giving me really good grounding. So I did that services delivery, I did the training, I then went into the pre-sales side of things, and then eventually probably, I don't know, 5 or 6 years, 7 years in, turning to sales and became an individual contributor in sales.
And so help us understand. So you ever became technical, or your role was always about sort of about understanding the business, about functional, or it was more on the sort of the sales pre-sale side?
Yeah, there was probably a time when I kind of threatened to be a bit technical, but I'm not sure. Again, my qualifications really stack up there. But no, where I started to flourish, I think, was when it was more to do with getting people to understand what the software could do and how they could apply it to their business, and then really connect the dots between adding value to them. Ultimately, people are paying lots of money for software. They've got to get good value from it, and that was really where the consulting side of what I did led me through then to being, taking that part of it into sales. And I can always remember when I joined sales for the first time, and when you know the software very well and you've perhaps taught on it and you've consulted on it and then you've got to sell it, I can remember my sales director at the time saying, right, now I know you're going to think you're the smartest guy in the room, but actually don't be, right? You can lead conversations, but do not let on that you've been a consultant, right? It's a great asset to have in your kit bag, but don't start waxing lyrical about features and functions in the software. Really turn this into a business conversation, and that's how you'll be successful. And I still remember that advice, and it's still good advice today. So.
And at some point you moved beyond the UK. So obviously you're from the UK, so you play for Luton Town. But at some point you moved abroad.
Yeah, so here now in the Middle East. So have been here now for 11 years. And about 2008, I joined SAP here in the Middle East, really when they were just starting out as SAP. They'd purchased back the company from the local subsidiary. And of course, some great stories. I joined on the 1st of September 2008, which was just when the Lehman Brothers collapsed 7 days later. So the role I'd come here for and we're going to move my family with, didn't exist within 2 months of me arriving here. So it was an uncertain period, but it was an interesting period. So I never quite made the move. So I was looking for properties here, looking for rental, as we all do. But actually the role didn't exist. So I ended up taking a different role within SAP, thankfully, and very grateful for them for doing that. But it took me another 4 years to make the move here. So I moved here in 2012.
And why Dubai? Just opportunity, or you were specifically targeting the Middle East?
Yeah, when you look around at the different sort of places you can live, and US or Asia, and different parts of Europe, my language skills aren't great, so it was always going to be sort of US or somewhere that was English speaking. But actually, when you look at the Middle East overall, especially at that time, it was really kind of coming into its own. There'd been a huge amount of development, probably for 15 years. For those that remember it, at the back of the 90s, coming through the 2000s. And I just felt it was a really interesting opportunity. And like most of us, we earmark 2 or 3 years and see how it goes. And then here we are almost 12 years later.
I wonder if you have any sort of reflections on sort of the role that culture plays in as it relates to your role and as it relates to the sort of the market you're in? Because I think that we talk a lot about, and we've all been to numerous conferences, many together, with slideshows, and people will put up statistics and they'll say 62% of people prefer customer experience, or 57 people will percent of people will prefer to pay for customer experience versus price. But always the asterisk of that often is, this is a study run in New York, or this is a study run in London.
Yeah.
And I wonder to what extent you feel that culture and geography and sort of you see differences in the market across different geographies and sort of ways of working.
I mean, of course. I mean, there are different ways of working in the different geographies you have, but it's interesting when you work, across different regions, and the responsibility. So, you could be in the US one week, and then, you're in parts of Asia or Middle East the next. And I think, what's funny for me is when you turn up and you see salespeople or you see sales teams, and they say, here, in Tokyo, or here in New York, or here in, Africa, it's different. We sell differently here. It's based on the relationship. You go, oh, really? Is it? And it's always based on the relationship. So everybody thinks that their culture of buying and culture of selling is slightly different, or the culture of how things work is different. But it's all based on the same principle. But there are then, different cultures here. Obviously, the buying and selling process is very different in the US to how it is here in the Middle East, and the way in which you conduct meetings in Tokyo or in Australia is very different from how you do it here in the Middle East. So there are definitely cultural differences, and you have to be aware of some of those nuances. But at the end of the day, it all boils back to they're buying from people, they're building a relationship with people. Beyond that, it's then your company, and beyond that, then it's the capability of your company to deliver some value for them. So in that order, it's always the same wherever you go.
Yeah, I remember, to your point about career advice, I remember when I first moved to Middle East in 2002, I think, and one of the first pieces of advice I got was, just that when you are speaking to sort of a local audience here, as you say, it's all about demonstrating value, it's all about building relationships, but the way you establish those relationships are slightly different. And I remember a piece of advice where, someone said to me, rightly or wrongly, that if you're going to go and speak to an American in America, you need to sort of stand up and you need to show them exactly what you know and they don't, because they're going to be impressed by that. But that's the complete opposite of what you need to do in the Middle East. You need to help them understand the great insights they already have, and actually help bring those out in order to sort of establish relationship. And I wonder whether in terms of you're thinking about sort of your role when you joined. You obviously said start of a sort of a global financial crisis which hit Dubai hard and obviously hit the world hard. So how did that sort of what are sort of the implications that we're still seeing from that financial crisis, you think, at the moment, in terms of when we look at the market and we look at what's happened over the last sort of 15 years or so?
Yeah, I mean, I'm old enough now to recognise more than one recession, right? So that's an unfortunate statistic that I carry now. But it's so when you think back to that kind of 08, 09, probably even up to 2012, sort of the ramifications of the financial crisis. There are some lessons learned that you take then into the crisis we're going through now. So obviously with the Ukrainian war, and then the pressures from a financial and people's inflation going up, making that very difficult for individuals. But at a business level, I think that's when people look to they look to rationalize, they look to focus on really what the core competencies of their business are. And I think you see that not just across the IT industry, but you see that across many industries where people just take a sense check, take a moment to make sure that they're profitable, make sure that they're pitching the right things and are really focused on the core things that will make their business going forward. And I think if you look at successful companies that came out of that that first crisis, and then you look at companies now, the lesson that I would take away from it is it's a good time to invest. It's a good time to invest in yourselves. It's a good time to companies that come out strong have really done their work. They invest in the right areas. They spend the time, developing the solution and really, placing a bet for what's coming next for their company.
And so talk us through how your career moved forward then in terms of SAP, and sort of you took on this sort of unexpected role, I suppose, in a sort of a new country. And so talk us through what happens from there.
Yeah, so when the role didn't happen here, and as again I said, I was very grateful to SAP at the time. I took on some sales leadership roles in Russia. And Russia like here, you said, Dubai was hit hard. Russia was also hit hard by the financial crisis. So those first couple of months, 6 months, 9 months, I guess, were a lot about financial restructuring, making sure that the business was in the right place to be able to go well. So I spent probably 18 months commuting in and out of Moscow and St. Petersburg, which was a fantastic experience. Taught me a lot about really having a career in a country where you don't know the language and you don't understand the language. So reading body language and still actually holding true to some of your values, I think was kind of an important lesson learned out of that. So I did that for a couple of years, and then that region expanded. So we took on what was the emerging markets of EMEA for SAP. So I was part of the leadership team for that, which then included Central Eastern Europe, Middle East, and Africa. So then got the opportunity to spend time mainly in South Africa, here in the UAE, still obviously traveling to Russia and then Czech Republic and Poland and others. So again, it was an amazing experience to, one of the great things that SAP is it's a fantastic learning experience. It sets itself up for success in building careers and training people and helping people, develop as individuals and as professionals. And, that was a good, probably 4 or 5 years of my career where, I earned an awful lot, and I have a lot of, I'm very grateful to that time at SAP for, giving me those experiences, number one, walking through the snow in the middle of nowhere and, trying to find the right train stations and, find the right customer buildings and, not being able to talk the language and all these kind of things. Just, they're great and sort of defining experiences if you can still be successful, through those. And then took the opportunity when I came out of SAP I had a short stint back at a company I worked for before, which was called Infor, and then moved to Red Hat, the open source company, which is now part of the IBM group of companies. And again, I looked after primarily Middle East and Africa, and then expanded those territories again, taking on Russia and Central Eastern Europe and really, trying to drive a growth agenda for Red Hat at the time.
I'm really struck by how the countries at which your career has taken you to have been quite emerging and sort of fast-moving economies. In sort of Russia, obviously since the sort of fall of the Berlin Wall, and sort of got South Africa since sort of apartheid, and you've obviously got sort of Middle East, which is we sit in a country which has actually only been independent for 50 years, right? These are incredibly fast-moving economies versus where we're both from, obviously in the UK, which is maybe not so fast-moving, but so. And so, what help us understand what was that move to Red Hat? What did you see as the promise of Red Hat at the time?
Yeah, so Red Hat at the time was probably a $1.5 billion company, something in the region of like 5,000 to 6,000 employees, and what's happened over my career, a bit more by luck than judgment, but I think when I got to Red Hat, I realised that's actually something that I need to be a little bit more deliberate about. Is this? I kept going to smaller companies each time, and the roles then became more significant. So if you think about the attraction for me at Red Hat was to be able to create or grow very quickly in these regions where open source was welcomed, perhaps even more so in some mainstream companies, and then the opportunity really was then to grow, to outpace the growth of the rest of the company and build a significant proportion. So what we were able to create as a team here was we went from 12% of the EMEA number, which was kind of a rounding error at the end of quarters, to something that was nearer 30-35%, which suddenly becomes a very important part of the business. And how you build a business, often when you're part of a very big organization, as I said, I really enjoyed my career at SAP, but your network is probably 250 people. It's a 65,000 people business at the time. So there's an awful lot of people you don't know, and you're not engaged with. Whereas in Red Hat, being 5,000 or 6,000 people, if my network was 500, then it was a much bigger influence on the overall organization. And then that became something that, as you build your career around a growth strategy and being able to define what it takes to go from 5 to 50 or 50 to 250, then it's becomes an interesting concept for other companies when they're all looking to grow.
And yet you left what sounds a really exciting role to join Sitecore.
Yeah.
So tell me, I mean, did you know much about Sitecore before you joined? And how did that come about, and what made you make the jump?
Yeah, I did know Sitecore before, but really only in kind of a brief knowledge of the industry. But actually, what attracted me when I started to investigate what they were doing, they've got quite a rich history. Sitecore, as we know it today, with the solutions that we provide, is probably a 3-year chapter, where there's a whole 20-year chapter before that, where it has quite a cult following. It has quite a had quite a meteoric rise out of Copenhagen in the early days, and the founders and really those early employees really pioneering in the industry and really trying to be something different to the established brands that were around at that time. And I think when you think about the reiterations or the chapters that companies go through, there was a really clear vision of what Sitecore wanted to achieve in its next chapter. And I felt at that time of my career, Red Hat had just joined IBM, so it's now part of a 400,000 people company. That actually, the challenge I was looking for was really to see whether we could, change the course of Sitecore's history and actually impact the industry overall and the MarTech, industry specifically within IT, to see what we could change. See what we could do. What was the art of the possible? Right? There aren't many companies that have gone through sort of 2 or 3 reiterations and then been successful. Generally, what happens to companies is they either get acquired or they fade away and become not so prominent in the industry. Whereas Sitecore's managed to stay in that upper quadrant for many years, and then as you reinvent each time, you have to make sure you sustain that success.
I had a stat the other day that Sitecore are one of only 2 organisations that have actually been able to maintain that top right quadrant,
right?
for the whole history of the report, which is actually, to your point, through those reinventions over the last 20-odd years, all of that change to be able to always be in that leader category, is actually quite a significant achievement, I think.
Yeah, I mean, it started as a 1-product company, and then it becomes a 2, and then a 3-product company, and it was a 3-product company for a long time, and that's really where even if you Google today, what is Sitecore, it will hark back to those earlier years and really define what it was. And and now, as the last 3 years, we've been acquiring, more software as a service type brands to complement the base and the foundation which we had. Then it's another chapter, and we have to go through, the change mentality of bringing in new organisations, taking the good of what they do and trying to industrialise that and scale it, and then really put a product, to market which is going to keep you in that top quartile of the quadrant. Yeah.
So let's take maybe you could help us out and understand the kind of the market that you found when you your first joined in Sitecore, your sort of analysis of what you were seeing there in that MarTech space. And as you say, Sitecore have been on this sort of journey from sort of a plucky startup, I suppose, 23 years ago, I think, to sort of, selling content management, it's kind of nascent concept, through to a more of a monolithic sort of big platform for enterprise businesses, across content and commerce. But when you joined 2.5 years ago, maybe just 3 years ago, obviously Sitecore were, as you said, ready for that next chapter and have since been through sort of a very interesting, acceleration. Maybe just talk us a little bit about the market that you saw and the opportunity you saw for Sitecore to reinvent itself a bit.
Yeah, I mean, like, many people, I joined Sitecore during COVID. So, those first months where you're meeting all of your colleagues, online and there's no people interaction was, I'm sure many people that are listening will have gone through a similar and same, experience. But that period changed, well, not just the IT industry, but changed many industries. And, if you think about, every company that is, worth its weight is, has a website and has some kind of experience for you to tap into that brand, to be able to interact with. Some go further than others, depending on what industry they're in. Sometimes it's just an information portal. Sometimes it's a full value, purchase experience. But everybody then had to become virtual. So all of the traditional businesses that were reliant on bricks and mortar and were reliant on, their brand being, somewhere comfortable that people could go, they had to bring in a digital element if they didn't already, or they had to really rapidly expand that digital footprint. So when you think about that time that I joined, it was just at the moment when everyone was saying, actually, the digital footprint of my business needs to be bigger than my traditional business. So how do I take what I have and make that something which is best in class, or taking 80% of my business or whatever. And I think that's where if you cast yourself forward to now, where we talked about recession earlier, those companies that succeed when they come out of recessions always look for new ways to sell. So they realize that their traditional types of businesses will suffer during recessions. People will have less money, they'll spend less, there will be less money to go around. If I can open out new channels of ways in which to capture the audience, then that's what success looks like. And that, for me, when I joined Sitecore, was right on the cusp of many, many industries, many, many organizations looking at how do I turn my digital experience into something which is true to my brand and the values that we hold, as an organization, but how do I capture new markets, and how do I capture new consumers or new businesses within that?
Yeah, I think it was Warren Buffett that said it's only when the tide goes out that you discover who's been swimming naked. And I think he said that about, to your point, that 2008 sort of recession, and all these businesses that maybe hadn't invested for the long term. And I think that was a meaningful change in a lot of strategies around, as you say, digital, and around thinking about, well, look, now digital is not this kind of, let's have a website on the side of the business whilst we sort of, go about doing the business. Actually, between, I suppose, the recession and between COVID, you had this instance of actually digital increasingly becoming the business, becoming the primary channel. If you were, fill in your EasyJet as a Sitecore customer, and they'll do 80% of their actual tickets will be sold through their website. So to what degree is the website the business, right? Your digital strategy is your business strategy. And so in terms of, so you joined during COVID, and there's, as you said, you hinted earlier that there was a sort of then attempt to look for acquisitions in the market, but help us unpack the strategy there. What are you trying to do in terms of moving away from this maybe more monolithic, maybe sort of bigger enterprise platform?
Yeah. So, Sitecore today still, offers solutions which can fit, in your IT environment, so your cloud. They can be in our cloud, or they can be in the public cloud. So that's important to be able to kind of give choice to customers about how they want to operate, and especially when you're operating in a global way. Public cloud is not for every country yet. So there's sovereignty laws and certain things about data center security, and those kind of things are very hot topics at the moment. So you have to be able to provide that choice. But for us to be able to self-develop solutions, from those core and foundational products was, probably a 3 to 5 year journey. And what people were starting to think about was, how do I make my environment as agile as possible? We have no idea what's coming tomorrow. And so I have to be ready for whatever we decide is coming tomorrow. And people, sort of use the example of TikTok. If you cast your mind back 2 years, nobody really, knew that they could be purchasing, these days people would be purchasing directly through TikTok as a platform. So you think about what implications that has for a brand. I have to be ready as an organization to be able to sell through a platform that doesn't exist today, that will become, a 2-click process. So if I look then back at my current systems, and as though they are providing me with, content and management of content and some kind of experience, the speed in which I need to go to market has just changed dramatically. So something that I said I can do in 6 months has to be done in 6 days. So when you think about that agility that you need to provide, what we looked for in those acquisitions was companies that were, one, self-sustaining, so already had a search. You could buy search on its own if that was your requirement, or if you needed commerce, then we had a commerce solution. But actually, the term that people use is it's composable, is it's interoperable. We also understand, and people have a lot of rich heritage in their own IT systems too. So you have to be a good neighbor, and you've got to play with other technologies in somebody's MarTech stack. So that was a really important decision-making process that we made. Was those technical capabilities that we had to provide were really based around that time to market. And then, of course, you look for feature richness. You look for, how much can I provide? What good value can I provide by all the different capabilities of the software? And I think, another buzzword at the moment is headless, and being able to give people the foundation of the platform, and then the freedom to be able to write that in any form that they want. And that's really, back to the TikTok type of example, that's giving people then the freedom to say, well, if I've got to provide social commerce, TikTok have the platform, I need to be able to fit into that platform, in which case I need that foundation has to be smart enough to be able to interact, with both, my existing stack plus this new world of software.
And so talk us through, so I hear what you're saying in terms of that sort of, composable architecture, which must have been actually a significant change in terms of mindset and culture within a business to be, as you say, that friendly neighbor, and to be able to offer businesses not just one platform to do everything, but actually say, hey, we have best of breed in many different areas. But obviously, realistically, there may be some instances where you want to use other products, and how do we play nicely with them? And I think that's so. Help me understand, what does that product portfolio look like now, 2.5 years later, in terms of the different parts of the composable picture you have?
So we have three main bits, or main parts of our business. So we have, content, where, really you're managing your assets. If you take L'Oréal as an example, they have thousands and thousands of images and assets that they would use across, multiple campaigns that they've run over the last decade. And you've got to keep that somewhere. So you have to be able to, manage those assets and be able to make those available across, the many different countries that they operate in, but also across the many different brands that they operate in. So that's kind of one area. And you think about experience, and you think about the experience that we're creating for our consumers. So, we talk about making our customers fans of the brand, and that's what it's about, right? That brand recognition is extremely important for our customers, and creating the right type of experience ultimately is a tremendous goal as people move their businesses towards digital. Yep. And then, last but not least is our third piece, which is commerce. You have to transact at the end of the day. You've got to be able to take some money. And that's important if you combine those three components, that they have an interoperability between them, but you're able to then to provide the full, suite. We do that, as we said, through, both the customer's cloud, our cloud, and a public cloud. So we can provide those through the three different forms.
I appreciate there'll be some stories that you won't be able to tell us, but in terms of thinking about your customers, thinking about your clients, and those brands, and as you say, they put a lot of trust in you to be the tangible representation of their brand, and the code, the software is as I say, and often, as you're saying, the main interaction they have, or main channel they have to their customer, and obviously then the security, the integrations to those different parts. So put a lot of trust in you. I mean, what are some of the big success stories you've had recently at Sitecore?
Yeah, so we ran a what we called a DX event in London last week, where both our companies were, Sitecore and Horizontal were both there, and there's some amazing sort of stories of what people are achieving with the platform. And I think one of the ones, I was part of a customer, so I ran a customer panel. So we had 3 customers on there, and we had one of our partners there. And one of those people on there was a gentleman who's the CEO for SynLab, which is a healthcare company provider out of the UK. And really what they set about to do was to be the digital arm of the overall group, and to really set a different stage for how we as citizens interact with the healthcare industry. So that they're on a completely different path to perhaps more of the traditional sort of healthcare institutions that we know. And what we were able to do is we were able to very quickly assimilate the assets that they wanted to do from a content perspective. We were able to very quickly set up the experience that they wanted, and the different types of experiences and the interactions that they wanted. And then ultimately, and this is part of the stage 3 for them, is that they want to be able to add a commerce component to it as people start to interact with them more. But that, when we talk about sort of time to value, from selection to now going live, that was a 4-month period. So, very quickly they bought into the solution stack and what we could offer from an overall solution set. And then it was about, how quickly can we take that to market, and how quickly can we get that out? So, that really for me was, when you're looking at an audience of 500 people looking at the stage saying, what can I learn from those people that are on the stage, the way in which they were able to deploy and really gain value from the software very quickly was the key takeaway there.
Yeah. I watched that panel, and I was really struck by actually how, in this instance, Sitecore, or even sort of thinking sort of digital in general, are changing the whole nature of that industry. I mean, I remember working for sort of the numerous sort of medical devices type organizations in the past, where they just didn't have that direct to consumer play, but the part of SynLab that you're talking about, that was all their sort of piece. How do we use digital for some of the first time ever to actually go direct to consumer, bypassing the healthcare professional as the kind of the arbiter of that sort of direct relationship, and then of course how do they do that in a cost-effective way so that they're ultimately influencing that sort of that end user, and then which then comes back to actually sort of apply influence on their healthcare professional itself, and that sort of way you're seeing not just a different type of digital channel. I think you're seeing a wholly transformation of that market itself. And I wonder, so I think sort of health has been one of those sort of markets where digital is really disrupted. What about other markets? Because I think Sitecore operate across all different types of industries.
I mean, even here locally, we do some work with Emirates NBD as an example, or we do a lot in retail. But there's actually it was a little while ago now. I think at the symposium that we ran early part of last year, actually in the US, and there's sort of a stark difference to how we talked about SynLab there as being very quick to get into digital and very that was their only real route to market. If you think about something like, so there's a great brand in the US called Cracker Barrel, which is a restaurant brand, quite traditional, loved by people in America. I definitely recommend it if you ever get the opportunity to visit one. But it's a very unique brand, and it's a very unique experience. And now, when you think again, when during COVID restaurants closed, so they had a digital presence. It was always about you could see the menus and you could interact with the brand kind of online. But they've changed that experience completely now. So you're getting to that stage now where you think, well, I've got a physical presence and I've got a digital presence, and I have to merge the two. So can I book a table online? Yes, I can. Can I order food while I'm online? Yes, I can. So they've got now a takeout part. Can I order the food before I arrive at the restaurant? Yes, I can. Can I pay for it on my app on my phone and gain points and all those kind of things? And that points can be against merchandise, which now you can buy in the store, which is attached to the restaurant. So from being a very traditional business where you would book a table over the phone, you would turn up, you would eat your food, and then you'd leave, to now being able to interact with that in a very digital manner. And that's all enabled through the Sitecore platform, as again transformed the way in which that business is operating. So there's lots of different uses for it. It's really people's imagination about how they want to change their go-to-market, or how they want their brand to be perceived over time.
Yeah, I'm struck by the advice you had in terms of ultimately, wherever you go in the world, sales is about establishing relationships with people. And I suppose part of the Sitecore promise is that it gives you the ability to really actually have much more meaningful conversations and build relationships and trust with a much wider sort of mass audience, through digital, than something respectively like a restaurant brand would ever actually be able to do without the aid of digital, without the aid of this type of enterprise technology. I wonder, it makes me think, then again, thinking again about your past, is that when you think about an organization like SAP, for example, it's a IT software business, but much more internally focused, much more about sort of, how do we implement best practice around finance, around operations, logistics, whatever it may be. But if I've understood, Sitecore is all about competitive advantage through that customer experience, right? You have like the Content Hub DAM product, for example, which does change and revolutionize how marketing departments work, but predominantly it's around sort of customer experience. And I just wonder how you found that sort of, that transition, going into Sitecore. Did you feel like you had to change your approach, your strategy? Was it different thinking about sort of customer experience versus internal operations?
It's certainly it certainly makes for interesting conversations. I think when you're selling or demonstrating the capabilities of your software for an internal function, or for they're still you think about what ERP and finance systems deliver for companies. I mean, they give them the stability, they give them the ability actually to be able to function in a much faster and slicker way. Overall, being able to automate all those processes, and we think, even if you think now about kind of what we're going through as an industry with AI coming and those kind of things, is that original automation and record keeping was the foundation for being able to then launch into the customer facing side of things. So it's kind of for me, it feels like almost like a natural evolution. You looked after the operational side of a business for so long. Actually, now it's afforded me to look into the customer facing part of the organization, and it's everything else is still the same. You're still trying to sell the value, you're still trying to demonstrate the capabilities, you're still trying to say my solution will, the way in which we deliver it, we'll do it faster, or we'll do it better, or you'll get more flexibility over our competition. But it's it just make for very interesting conversations, because you think about how much value you can give to a company. You think about how much traffic now goes through companies' websites, or goes through their mobile apps, or goes through their digital presence. It's a huge part of their market, and it's allowed companies to go global where they've been local or regional before. Because the reach is so much better and so much easier. And then of course, everyone has the supply chain, and that's where the original software I was selling kind of helps in the back end.
Fantastic. So you've talked about this kind of disruption of the market that you put in place a few years ago in terms of moving to that more composable piece. And I remember the first time I came across composable, there was a Gartner report in, I think, late 2020 that talked about this sort of imperative to move to this composable. And my understanding is that Sitecore are the first to really sort of embrace that more modern architecture amongst your competitor set, and the first to offer that sort of end-to-end solution, which is disruptive in terms of product. But I think you've also disrupted the market somewhat in the way you work with partners. So maybe you could talk a little bit about the sort of the change that you and your fellow board members put in place for how you work with partners.
Yeah, I remember that report, by the way. And we have another report from one of our competitors, which is a direct opposite to that. So at the time it was, don't go composable for all these reasons. And actually that same competitor now is all about composable. So, it was nice that some of the strategy that we set in that first instance has changed the way, our competitors work. And obviously, like you say, it was already with the analysts about, how the software needed to go forward. But when we came together as a leadership team, 2.5 years ago, headed through Steve Jakakis, who's our CEO, we were very clear on how we wanted to scale the business, right? So a lot of organizations, some of the ones that I've worked for, felt the need to be able to build that themselves and and do many of the implementations themselves and so on and so forth. We made a commitment straight away that actually our future was going to be how we partner with organizations. And there are a number of brands, yours included, and partners that we had who had a lot of Sitecore skills in the market. And for us to be able to replicate, why would we do that? Right? Why would we compete with our partners? Why would we bid for the same business? And what we've really asked, of our partner ecosystem is to, invest in those, skills that the market needs to make sure that as the demand increases, we have enough people in the market to be able to service it. And I think we've taken two different routes. We've done a strategic and some global alliances, and we announced with Accenture and we've announced with others, previously. But as important are those people that only look after Sitecore, Horizontal being one of them, and there are a few others, but also local markets. So as we start to expand in other parts of the Middle East, or we start to expand in other parts of Asia and Indonesia, the local partnerships are really, really important. And that's something where, as we were talking about earlier about companies getting back to their core competency, our core competency is writing and creating software. We shouldn't then think about, well, let's make another division of the business that delivers it. We have expertise. Part of the rationale of keeping me as the chief customer officer and not the chief revenue officer is because we've created a couple of additional support plans that will enable us to have a point of view. Everybody looks to the vendor and say, well, what's your view? But also, be able to provide a level of assurance and insurance around those implementations. So our philosophy really was to work with the partners, and we created a product called Sitecore 360, which enables a customer to be able to take some hours from Sitecore, which will complement what our partners are delivering, overall. And so far, the early successes in that have been really good. And and I think that combination of having the vendor, the partner, and the customer working in unison actually is is the recipe for success for the customer. And ultimately for us, it means that we can scale into regions and scale through businesses or countries that we wouldn't be able to do on our own.
Yeah, I mean, it's been transformative it's not about us, not about Horizontal, but I mean, that was such a statement of trust, I feel, as well, that it really, I think, changed a lot of perspectives in the partner community, and I think that was transformative in the market as well. But so I started off this interview with an embarrassingly calling you the CRO, and you corrected me to talk about how actually your responsibilities are far wider than just that. So maybe just talk a little bit about that role and what was the kind of maybe disruption you're looking for, and actually combining the different parts of your role and what that means for the company.
Yeah, I think if you look at traditional software businesses, certainly those ones that have been on-premise businesses, they've tended to sell the software, and then at some point in the future, if they have something else to sell you, they'll revisit you, and that could be 2 years, 3 years, 5 years down the line. What was important for Sitecore is we were doing two things. One is, we now have a breadth and depth of portfolio which can add different types of value to different parts of a business, but also a lot of that now is software as a service. And software as a service should be simpler. So it should be simpler to deploy. You then have to think about adoption and then the consumption of the software. So what we've done internally is to reorganize ourselves to say, well, that's now a continuous circle. That's not now something that we do and then it breaks and then at some point we go back because the partner owns that relationship and so on. So that continual relationship now means that we have to have different parts of our business doing different things at different times. So we sell the software, or we help a partner sell the software, or the partner helps us sell the software. Who's going to deliver it? As I talked about there, Sitecore 360 allows us to kind of put a wrapper around the partner and the customer at the same time. And then you have to think about, getting the value from it. So, okay, I've now implemented it. Am I rolling it out geographically? Am I rolling it out through divisions? Am I adopting enough of the technology or the capability of the software to really get true value? So we now have people in place within our business to help monitor that, to help companies drive that activity. Because so much of our history, for those that have worked long enough in the industry, will have heard more than once, I'm sure, we bought this software, we thought it was going to do X. It kind of does X, but it's not really, we're not really getting the full value from the software. And I think that's where, as IT has really started to move with pace, you can now get to a position where you say, well, if I'm not getting value from that software, I can get it from something else, and I can swap that out and swap that back in. And that's really where the composability of the solutions helps you fail faster. That's a kind of an odd concept, maybe not the first time we've all heard it, but failing faster is good, right? Because it means that you can reiterate, you can continue to reiterate. And I think that's what we're trying to get now with our customers is to really think about getting through the cycles faster, bringing in new capabilities all the time. The software that you're deploying shouldn't be about, well, when am I going to upgrade it, and is there a big migration project? Those things are, getting to be the things of the past. If you can get to a composable and headless environment, that upgrade isn't needed anymore. You're just adding new features and capabilities all the time. And then it's really then thinking about, well, what do I need to do next? So what's the next TikTok coming? AI is, as I said earlier, is playing a massive part in perhaps how the future might work for a lot of companies and how they deploy that through their software. So they now have to think, well, do I have the solution stack to be able to take advantage of that capability? And that's really what we're trying to provide by closing that loop or keeping that loop alive at all times. Is you're effectively trying to make sure that the customer is moving along with you and ultimately getting what they need for their business.
You talked earlier about no one really saw commerce on TikTok come in, and who knows what's next. And I think there was, you talk at the DX event in London, there was a exciting announcement about the Sitecore product and AI and ChatGPT. Do you want to talk a little bit about that?
Yeah, I think, as many of any of us that are in the IT industry or outside the IT industry for that matter, I think everybody's having a little play with it, and now that they've created the interface in which we can converse, people are starting to understand the power of what it can do. And part of that DX event, we demonstrated a way of using AI as to really moving that experience to a really personalized experience. So if you think about I want to go onto a website, I want to book a holiday, or I want to create an experience from a day trip or a week trip or whatever it might be, just by the small interactions that you can have with that website, AI will work in the background to really, upping the personalization. So if you think about, a lot of companies will talk about the more clicks I can get you to go through on a website, the more chances there are you're going to spend money with us. Yeah. The more personal I can make that experience, the more chance there is. And I think that it's that personalization which is going to be the next kind of game changer. Everyone does a little bit of personalization. Some companies do it well, some companies not so well. But AI will be able, will lead you into an area where it will be very personal to you, personal to your own situation, what you're specifically looking for. So it will direct you to the product that you're looking to buy online, or the experience that you're looking to buy online, in a much faster way, and in a way that makes you feel, as a consumer, that you're much more part of the overall experience, and you've bought into the brand and you've bought into the experience. So it could, I think it's one of those technologies where we don't fully know even now what the art of the possible is, which makes it even more exciting, I think.
Yeah, and I think it just speaks to your central point around, by investing in a product or suite of products like Sitecore, you have that promise of the headache is yours for actually trying to figure out how to integrate the next technology, and that all of your clients then actually benefit from the work you do, and so you can keep them ahead and keep them abreast of whatever's new and give them those capabilities as soon as they're available in the market. And I listened to Steve, your boss, I suppose, on the stage talking about it, and he talked about a really interesting use case for it for your commerce play around. His example was that people might go and currently search on a commerce site and say, mother present or something, but actually and you'll get a sort of a SERPs page, a list of search results, and that will be kind of interesting and kind of relevant, but you've still got to do a lot of hard yards yourself. And I think the use case he was talking about was actually that you'd be able to have a much more genuine and sort of nuanced conversation through sort of ChatGPT. And I mean, is that where you see most of the possibilities for AI and the commerce piece?
Yeah, I think it's just contextualizing things, right? I mean, it's you would put in some keywords and hope that it comes back with something that, in this case that Steve was using, his mother would like. Whereas, you can actually say, my mother is interested in, walking, or my mother is interested in, these types of holidays, or she's interested in these types of brands, and then you're getting back a much more contextualized and personalized, set of information for you to be able to make choices for. So, again, we're not fully understanding what the art of the possible is here, and I think working with some of our partners, yourself included, I think will help us explore what some of those possibilities could be, and really it's just down then to the imagination of individuals. How can I use the technology to contextualize what I do or my brand, and as I said earlier, it's about making consumers of your brand fans of your brand. And this, this can only help that, right? We've all been in those situations where page doesn't load fast enough, or I can't find what I'm looking for quickly enough, and I go and look somewhere else for it. The longer you can capture people, the faster you can get them to the answer that they're looking for, within your channel, whether it be through your app or through social media or through the website, then the better it is. And that suite of solutions is ultimately there to be able to serve that. And that's what every software company wants to do. They want to be on the bleeding edge of innovation, and by what we've done in the last 2 to 3 years, it's now given us the platform to be able to take advantage of those technologies. Before, if ChatGPT had come out 5 years ago, Sitecore might have have struggled to be able to capitalize on that opportunity. Whereas now, with the solutions we have, it can slip straight into them.
I just think it may not be a sexier use case, but I always think that we've obviously built a few websites, and selling Sitecore through the years, or being in the room when you guys are selling that, is a lot of people have always seen, quite rightly, Sitecore as the world leader in terms of personalization of content, and they've always been at the forefront of what is the art of the possible in terms of personalization of content. But one of the things that has always held back personalization, in my personal opinion, for many of those brands, is not the capability of the software, but literally the ability to write content, because someone's still got to create the content. And I just wonder whether some of the real opportunities for ChatGPT will be around that actually the kind of the maybe real-time creation of content in the future, or even just the kind of the taking a lot of the kind of the hard yards about the initial sort of copyright or content creation away, allows for the promise of Sitecore, which is that kind of real-time personalization of content, of images, of copy, of course to action, based on who is actually using the system, right? Yeah. And I wonder if you see that, or if you're exploring that. Yeah,
I mean, even back to September in Chicago, when I think Paige O'Neill, our former CMO, stood on stage. Her whole presentation and the content within it was created through AI, all the imagery and everything else. And that was, sort of not my first experience, but it was the first experience I'd seen where it was, really utilized, in a public forum like that, through Sitecore. And it was, exciting. The imagery itself was quite exciting. It's something that you wouldn't think, wow, I wouldn't have created that kind of imagery. But that, content as an asset is becoming a much more valuable asset to, for a company. Again, I used the example of L'Oréal earlier. You think about, kind of how they go to market now, and you think about, some of the imagery and content that they produce. It's the lifeblood of what they do. Right? I mean, we can all walk into a store and, for those that are using, what L'Oréal provide, they can pick up the products and read what they do and take them. But you want to visually be able to experience what they do and how transformative those products can be. And that's what the content is doing for them. So I agree with you. I think the opportunity to create content will be huge. Of course, then people have the challenge of, how do they keep copyright and the rest of it. But that's a challenge coming, or a challenge we're in. But ultimately, it's going to be the real value of your company, and the asset value of that content is going to be important.
Yeah. And in many ways, I think it highlights the need for personalization again, in a place where the constraints to content creation are removed. How do you actually find something meaningful where it's actually about the personalization of that content, not just content in general? So on that topic, and sort of thinking back to the DX event in London, one of the other things I was really struck by when Steve, the CEO, was on the stage, and maybe you could help elaborate, is he was talking about how from the survey that you've done with your customers and the business cases that they put together and the results they've had, that they're seeing an ROI from their Sitecore investment in less than a year. I think that's right.
Yeah, I think Steve was like 9 months, he was saying, right, on the stage. And, we see that quite a bit, across the different industries. And I think that's where we were talking about that speed to market earlier, and the ability to be able to, meet the demands of the competition, meet the demands of the consumer about how we sort of move, companies are moving forward. So if you think about someone like Emirates NBD, they created, content, as part of their, rollout of their new site, increased traffic by more than 92%. So, immediately they're seeing the returns on investment. How you quantify that in terms of months and in terms of throughput. It's like 16,000 more visits on their site, per month than in previous months. You take another company like Ineos. I was on stage with Ineos, before the launch of their Grenadier vehicle, which actually was last week in the UK. They reached their sales targets within 2 months. That's their annual sales targets within 2 months, just because the platform that they created was such a great experience, and the buzz that they'd been able to create around the brand and around the launch, just meant that they were able to get a much faster time to value than they ever anticipated. So there's some great examples of around like that, and I think yourself as an organisation creating some of those experiences for our customers too. So we have a lot to look forward to in that type of thing.
Yeah, it's remarkable to see when you see that success and you see it so dramatically. I mean, Emirates NBD we work with, and it's not just the sort of the huge extra engagement, the acceleration you give them, but what Sitecore has also allowed Emirates NBD to do is create a marketplace, that commerce offering, a bank offering, a commerce product where their credit card is a sort of secret invitation into that sort of commerce area where they can earn points, etc. And we've got also sort of Yas Island again locally here, sort of the sort of great sort of theme park sort of location in Abu Dhabi. Again, once they went live with Sitecore, just we've been on stage talking with them about sort of 100% increase in sort of sales, their best ever week, their best ever day in terms of sort of ticket sales, but it's not just those sales. It's also about how does the act of purchasing a ticket be as exciting as the venue itself, right? And that's really where you are dealing with brands which exist on emotion and excitement, not just about the craftsmanship of your code and the transaction that your software completes and the security. It's also about how you can help them orchestrate wholly different types of branded experience and be true to their brand promise, I think.
Yeah, and I think that's a lot of people now are thinking, very much more about the value of their brand and what it stands for, and actually how they want people to interact with that brand. And I think that's the exciting part now of, having now come into this industry. And as you've described earlier, you're sort of at the customer-facing part of the industry is what's the art of the possible and of creating those different types of interactions. And there's nobody more demanding than the consumer. And I think the brands have really got to make sure they stay on the cutting edge of the technology.
So you've experienced Sitecore over the last couple of years, and you've made that leap. And obviously, you've got many colleagues currently, and there may be other people out there who are thinking about Sitecore as an aspirational place to work. I mean, what would you say to your current colleagues and your future colleagues about why Sitecore is going to be such a great place for their career?
I mean, we spoke at the very early part of this about the different chapters that companies go through, and I think the chapter we're in at the moment is just a really exciting and fun one. If you think about, the amount of change that we're trying to invoke in an organisation, from our systems and processes right through to the way in which we think about going to market, the way in which we interact with our customers and our partners is we've effectively challenged everything that we do to create the best possible company that we can be. But at the same time, what we're, with the technology and the stack that we've created, we're right at the forefront of what people want to try and do. So, nobody wants to be part of a software company that's sort of, bringing up the laggards of the industry. You really want to be on that forefront, pioneering as to what the art of the possible is. And, again, as we spoke earlier, with the whole social media movement now, and the speed to market becomes such an important part. New ideas all the time. And that's one of the things I try and create in my organization, is to come forward with new ideas, challenge the organization in how we do something today, how we go to market, how we're interacting with customers, the ideas that we're trying to provide our customers, or at least being receptive to new ways in which the customers want to work with us. Because, that's what creates the next generation of software and then the next generation of capability after that. And I think that's really, as an opportunity to really challenge the industry, challenge Sitecore, challenge our competitors to be as good, but really move the industry forward.
I mean, we talked at the beginning about your movement, away from your sparkling, glittering, football career.
You're really stretching that.
in my mind, and I think that thinking back to the 90s when I sort of started my career, the thought of working in IT would have just been. I just wouldn't have interested me at all. But I think that, and there are still some IT companies, if I was to be honest with you, that actually probably maybe wouldn't be super exciting to work with.
Yeah.
But as you're saying, Sitecore, for as long as the sort of, the Gartner and the market analysis reports have been out, you've always been a leader, right? One of the only two brands to be able to do that. You've got that proven track record of reinventing yourself. But it's not just about, it is about the code, but it's not just about that. You are reshaping industries. You are at the forefront of changing consumer trends, and you are working with some of the biggest brands in the world who have genuine aspiration. That's why they partner with Sitecore, right? And I think for that it would be an incredibly exciting place to work. But so here's my final question to you. So for whatever reason, we always finish our podcasts with the same question. I was fascinated by there was a physicist called Feynman, and he had this famous sort of quote where he was asked if the world were to end, and all of some knowledge of the world and everything we knew in science couldn't be passed on, save for one thing. What would be the one thing that he would pass on to give that next generation of humanity, or whatever it might be, the most information? What would be the one thing he'd want to pass on? For him, for Feynman, it was actually that things are created from atoms. He thought if you understood that, you could unpack a lot. But thinking about the many, many, many decades of your career, Lee, right? And all the recessions you've lived through, and indeed, it could come from, football, from accountancy, from software, from, some cycle, whatever. What would be the one piece of knowledge or one piece of advice that either you've received or you've learned that you would pass on to that next wave of Sitecoreans or your children?
Crikey, how profound can I be? So, look, I think I've been really lucky in my career. I've worked for some great people and worked with some great colleagues, and I sort of feel quite blessed in a way. If I look back at those colleagues, they've ended up in some really prominent pieces of the industry. So it's quite exciting to the fact that we sort of knew them and conversed with them. But I think there's a couple of things I would say. One is, somebody always said to me, number one, be yourself. Right? I think there's a lot of people can be actors and try and be something that they're not. And I think, be authentic and be genuine. I think people, prefer that. And I think people, on the whole, I think if you're managing people or you're an individual contributor or part of a team, and it's really that team kind of culture that wins. If you're your authentic self every day, I think that's really one area. I think you'll go far. Your career will progress just through that authenticity. But I also think, one of the things that I try and say to people is, don't just think of the job as a job. Right? It's a means to an end. Of course, it gives you a salary, or there's some rewards in that you can obviously take into your personal life. But I think if you think about that role as to what impact can I have on that team, that organization, that industry, when I leave it, what are people going to say? Either about Lee or George or the impact that I had or the time that we were there. So it's that kind of legacy that you leave behind. And I think that for me is, if you think about the role you're in today, whether you're working for Sitecore, part of my team, or part of another team, or working for another company, if you think about the role you're in, what's the impact you're having? And if you left tomorrow, what would be the legacy? What would be my imprint on that company? Because I think for me, that's made me think, probably for the last 10, 15 years, it's made me think a little bit differently about the role I'm playing at the organisation, about how impactful I think I could or should be. And then ultimately you hope that, you do leave an imprint on the organisation, or on people at least, who were part of that organisation at the time. So, they would be my couple of bits of advice, I think.
Fantastic. Well, look, I'm sure you've made an impression on anyone who's watched this, and you've certainly brought your authentic self. So I really appreciate it, and I appreciate you spending time with us, and thanks very much for all your insights today.
Thanks for the opportunity. I really appreciate it, George. Thank you.